Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Line goes up, therefore line will continue going up. This is what I call the extrapolation fallacy. It's really just an error when it comes to scale, is that people see something growing, they see a line going up, they see more sales increasing, they think it's always going to go up. They see the value of an asset go up, therefore it's going to continue going up. When in reality, most things occur in cycles. There's a peak and a valley. There's an expansion and a contraction. There's a growth and a decay. And so thinking that the growth is always going to happen and you're going to make a lot of money on an asset, it usually doesn't work out too great. If we take a historical look at really far back, most things occur in cycles, whether it's a growth of technology, which maybe has plateaus, or it's something like even the growth of population. It's easy to look at things now and be like, population line goes up, because if we take a really distant view, population has increased a lot over the course of human history. But it wasn't always the case. If you look at Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries, that line does not always go up. I should do it this way for you guys, right? That's better. Line does not always go up. Sometimes line goes down. Sometimes a third of your population, or maybe even like 80% in Sicily, I think, will die. Like, you will have a major line decrease. Then if you look at different countries, like first world countries, even today, it's like line doesn't always go up. Sometimes line goes down. Population decreases. It doesn't increase. And it's not always a result of the government mandating one child or something. Sometimes just it reaches a point like in Japan and it plateaus and starts going down. Or if we look at the native white population of the United States, plateaus, maybe even goes down. So line does not always go up all of the time. That's a big error of thinking. It gets a lot of people in trouble because they buy in at the wrong time, not realizing that things are cycles. This is part of a natural thing. You grow up, you get big and strong, then you get old and you start to decay. You get gray in your beard, you get that kind of stuff. But people think that when a technology is new, that thing is always going to be increasing. And if we just take a historical look, that's not the case. A really good example is record sales in the 1990s. If you were to look at record sales from 1990 to 1997, the record industry was printing money. They were spending $500,000 on recordings, maybe even $1 million, and making it all back on record sales, making huge profits, just completely stuffing their pockets. Everybody was making money. The artists sometimes were making money. Everybody else in the industry was making a lot of money. But if you were to fast forward just 3 years, you'd figure out that record sales fell off a cliff once Napster entered the scene. This is absolutely a reality, and it's not just an anecdote of like everyone I knew in 2000 stopped buying CDs. It's like you can see line go down. Now you fast forward to 2024, nobody buys any physical media. Maybe super fans will buy a vinyl. Vinyl sales are kind of come back because if you're going to buy physical, you might as well buy something that's really physical, that's big and has an actual needle, versus a CD, which everybody would put that CD in their computer and rip it onto their hard drive. When I was in college in like 2001, 2002, nobody bought CDs. Even as a music major, I didn't know anyone in the music department besides myself who bought CDs regularly. Everybody just stole it. They just grabbed it off LimeWire. They grabbed Napster at that point. I think it had been broken apart, but yeah, they just grabbed it off LimeWire. They pirated everything and they didn't care about it at all. Even their own industry, where you would think that they would want to buy into their own industry, they're like, no, who would buy a CD? That's stupid. So everybody, that's like my age and younger, just stopped buying music, and now nobody buys it. They just stream it. So no, line does not always go up. But if you were to look at 1990 to 1997, you would definitely think that. If we look at ebooks, we had some similar things happen without a big crash where people were stealing ebooks. Rather, not more people are buying ebooks, and there's more and more and more books being printed. So for each individual author, line now goes down for the most part. Whereas if you were in the ebook market in like 2011, yeah, line's going up. But most people weren't keen on selling ebooks until like 2018, when the market had already been completely saturated. Now it's so super saturated that even though ebook sales are somewhat stable, line for the authors is actually going down, because that same amount of sales is divided against more and more and more and more books. There's like hundreds of thousands of books being published every year on Amazon, maybe like 1 million. And now that you have AI, it's just line is hitting, for individual authors, line is pretty close to zero. It's hitting pretty close to bottom because of the nature of the ebook business. But back then, people thought line goes up. You got to get into the indie fiction market. You got to be selling ebooks. That's where you're going to make your money. Line does not always go up. Sometimes things are a cycle. Sometimes things expand and contract. I think it's contracting. I know most of my sales now are physical books. They're not even ebooks anymore. People still want ebooks, but it's a much smaller percentage, certainly, of my readers. And for me, I rarely buy ebooks now. I buy ebooks very occasionally, but for the most part, I don't buy them anymore. Audiobooks were the same thing. Everybody was talking about in the indie book publishing sphere back in like 2018 that audiobooks are a growth industry. You got to get your books into audiobooks because it is a growth industry. This is where you need to be. And then it wasn't, right? Not only did it not get saturated, the bottom completely fell out of it. So people stopped buying stopped buying audiobooks when the pandemic happened. When they stopped commuting to work, when they started doing more remote work. Why would you don't need 2 hours a day to fill up with a book, so you don't buy any more audiobooks. And just because you're in a growth industry, by the way, doesn't mean you automatically get sales. That's the kind of the thinking. It's like, if the line is going up, I'll get in that line, right? It's like, no, line was going up for lots of popular books being converted into audiobooks. If you didn't have a book that was already popular, making an audiobook doesn't really help you, right? You have to have a book that was already popular. People were excited to buy audiobooks of Lord of the Rings. They weren't excited to just buy a random audiobook from an author that they never heard of. That's the truth about that as well. We have the same sort of things with like Bitcoin. Everybody has been for years. They've been like, Bitcoin's going to $1 million. And it may eventually go to $1 million, but it's not going to be a straight shot of line goes up. It's going to be line goes up, line goes down, line goes up. And by the time it gets to $1 million, that's not going to be quite the peak you think it is. Now, first of all, your unit of record is still the United States dollar. It's not Bitcoin. You're not valuing anything in Bitcoin, which leads to the truth that people are buying Bitcoin because they hope to sell it for US dollars. Yeah, when it hits $1 million, you'll be buying Big Macs for $3,000, which will somewhat diminish the growth of a Bitcoin over that amount of time. And it may take a long time for us to get to where Big Macs are costing, $3,000. The truth is, people were buying Bitcoin because they wanted to trade it for dollars, and a lot of people got taken for a ride. Most of the people on the internet and on Twitter telling you got to buy Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin. They were telling you to buy it because they had Bitcoin. They wanted line to go up so that they could then sell the Bitcoin for dollars. Right? We went to the moon. Now we can't go to the moon. Why? It's because technology is not a straight line. You end up hitting plateaus. You end up hitting limits. The limits could be materials. It could be like, how much payload you can get into space. It could be things like interstellar radiation. There's all kinds of barriers that you may encounter. And you may forget that those things exist. You don't know those things exist when you're in 1950 to 1969, going from nobody has been to space and we don't even know if there's what's in space, maybe like either, to we're on the moon. We sent human beings that landed and walked on the moon. That 20-year space was one of the most explosive expansions of technological power in the history of humanity. It'd be very rash to believe that explosion was going to continue forever. Rather, what happened was we reached that point, and then there's a plateau, and they're still increasing technologies. Things are still getting better when it comes to interstellar space. Even though we can't go to the moon, there's improvement in other areas, but it's not been the same kind of growth that you had. This is natural. Like lots of technologies, if you look at swords or steel, someone invents a new kind of steel. Steel gets way better. Swords get way better. Then they stay the same quality. Swords and armor stayed the same quality for a long time. Then like spring steel gets invented and things get better again, and then it stays the same quality for a long time. This is what happens. We've been using the same gun platform in the United States for like 70 years. The AR-15, which is the M16, it's Armalite Rifle 15, which was itself, I think, a shrunken down AR-10, which shot a .308. That was invented in the 1950s. So we're looking at a rifle platform that it looks very modern, and it is very modern, but it's 70 years old now. So to think that you would tell somebody in like 1920 you're going to be firing rifles that are 70 years old, in like 1919 you're going to fire a rifle that's 70 years old, it's like, I'm going to fire a rifle from before the Civil War, right? So the technology of guns increased explosively until we reached a plateau where arms were really good. So we're not going to be getting way, way, way better rifles. They improve a little bit at a time. They're still getting better, but a little bit at a time, rather than going from, we're shooting black powder single shot rifles to within a couple of years, like lever action cartridge loading rifles, right? That growth in technology in the mid 19th century was just incredible for firearms technology, and it was big in the 20th century as well, but it tapers off. The M1 Abrams, I think, is still equipped with an M2 Browning machine gun, which was invented near the end of, I think it was invented in like 1924, right? As a heavy machine gun, and it was used in World War II. It's an old platform. I remember reading somewhere that the B-52, which by the time it exits service in like 2050, it will have been in service for like 100 years, almost 100 years of service for that airframe, which is insane to think about. Except for the fact that if you know that line doesn't always go up. Sometimes you plateau, sometimes things are as good as they need to be, and you don't really need them to be that much better, right? This is natural with economics. There's a boom and there's a bust. There's an expansion, there's a contraction. The economy expands, you get an overvalue of assets, the economy shrinks, you sell off the toxic assets at a discount, the next round of investment occurs. It's a cycle. Bear market, bull market, or bull market, bear market. You have to keep in mind that this is normal. The stock crashes. I'm recording this after a stock crash. The stock line will eventually go up again, and it'll eventually go down again too, right? So main problem with the extrapolation or the assumption that trends will continue is that it really doesn't ever happen. I'm having a hard time thinking of one that doesn't happen unless you are going so far back that all of the little ups and downs are sort of disappear from the data, like population growth. You have to zoom really far back, and line is going up, and in fact, it's gone like parabolic, right? But it's forgetting that there's many things that interrupt that, and that's not a universal thing, right? And things that do tend to go up over time also encounter major plateaus, whether it's population or technology or something like that. So think of these like two things in contrast. Computing power will increase until we reach some technical limit that we cannot overcome without some other technical breakthrough, right? Following the trend of all other technology, or computing power increases will slow as the need for increased power plateaus. I'm giving those two scenarios to think about with computing power because we look at the past, it's like computing power doubles every so many years. Why would you think that trend would continue indefinitely? It's likely that it wouldn't for those two reasons. Either we'll reach some technical limit, we can't shrink the chips down any further. You're at like 8 nanometers and you just can't get it smaller without some other thing blowing up. Or there's just no need for it. And both of these things I think are pretty reasonable. And I think there's been a pretty good plateau when it comes to computing power. And one of the reasons that I think this is, first of all, that second one, our need for power. For the average computer user, they're not needing any more computer power than they had 10 years ago. My wife runs an online business where she is streaming all the time. And she's using a machine that I built almost 10 years ago at this point, right? And it runs perfectly, runs flawlessly. And if I'm thinking hard, it's like I'm using the same software I used in like 2010. It's nice to have extra computing power for a lot of the things I do. I can render videos much more quickly, obviously, and I can do things at higher resolutions, and they're still technologically better things. But for most things like designing book covers, it's still Photoshop, and I'm still doing the same things in Photoshop that I did however many years ago. I'm still using Microsoft Word to write documents. I'm basically using the same interface I used from the 1990s to write books, which is a word processor. Now, I think then I might have used ClarisWorks instead of Microsoft Word. But the point is that the need for computing power has really leveled off. I think this is even true in the gaming space, is that you can pay a lot of money for a bigger, crazier rig, like with your RTX 4090 or something, but it actually doesn't deliver a better gaming experience than you had on your old PC. Yes, you could drive a 4K monitor. Lots of people don't have 4K monitors. That's one of those technical limitations. No reason to increase the amount of pixels you could process if the monitor can't even display them, right? If you're already at really high frame rate, do you need more detail that you can't see? Probably not. So for lots of people, they just don't need that extra power. Have games gotten more fun with that extra power? Not really. Have games gotten more artistic? Not really. Have the aesthetics improved? Well, I mean, the texture quality has improved, which is nice, so you can see more details, but they haven't gotten more beautiful from like an artistic standpoint. So all that extra power hasn't delivered anything special for the consumer, and I think that's why there's been a big plateau and maybe a fall off on next gen console sales, is that for a lot of people PS4 is good enough. Their games looked good enough on PS4. There's plenty of PS4 games to play. They're not super excited about the PS5 exclusives or the Xbox Series X exclusives. They're not particularly excited about games that they need a better console to play. They're okay doing whatever they're doing right now, and that's fine. And they don't see a huge graphical leap the way we saw between like the PS1 and the PS2. So when it comes to like graphical increases, we saw line was going way up for a long time, and then somewhere around the HD from PS3 to PS4, it really started to level off, and now it's a much slower increase for like what the consumer can actually perceive. And enthusiasts can perceive, ray tracing and all that stuff, but the average person, they just don't even see it. So, if I'm being honest, most of that stuff, we've increased the power, but we're using the same software. Even if you get out your phone, you're probably using the same apps you used 10 years ago. Right? And I think if we apply this to AI, I think it's a lot more reasonable to assume that there's going to be a plateau. And in fact, I think we've already hit a plateau when it comes to large language models. Image generation software has improved only a little bit. It's not that there's no improvement. It's just the improvement is a lot slower. So the images don't really look better now than they did last year. Fingers maybe are slightly better, but even then they're still in uncanny valley territory with almost every image. With Midjourney and with every other image generator that I've seen, the quality has really leveled off. It got to a pretty high quality, and then it hasn't really gotten much better over the past 2 years, and that's just how it is. I think in terms of investment, you may have a big bubble pop as you realize that most people do not need large language models for the vast majority of things that they do. It might be nice to have that integrated into a search that would just kind of give you a general summary of all the search results. And then you can go deeper if you want to. I think that that's really useful, and that's a great use case for large language models. But we didn't need that too much, right? It's just a small increase of quality of life. And even then, I wouldn't trust those because search results are full of lies all the time. So it might be slightly useful, but you're not going to see new applications for it just emerge out of thin air just because you improve the technology. So I think we're likely to see a bubble burst, and we're probably in some sort of technical plateau there, which would go along with every other technology trend that we've ever seen throughout human history. When you're in the middle of the growth, it's easy to think, oh, what's going to be like in 30 years? I bet it's just going to be like like Back to the Future in 2015. We've got holographic images popping out and eating you. It's like, not quite. That's very cool aspirational thinking, but it turns out there was a lot more plateaus on the way to the year 2015 as well as to the year 2024. So cool things will continue to improve, but for them to improve at the same rate always, nope. And for a lot of things, line will also go down, particularly when you're looking at markets and assets. You could be in the next music industry, which just completely collapsed. In fact, here's my thing about the music industry. Digital distribution, managing digital distribution is about, carefully aligning rights so that nobody gets paid. It's about carefully managing the rights to music so that no artist ever gets paid money for other people listening to their music. That's where we're at compared to 1997, where like even a mid-list band could spend $300,000 on a recording and earn back because record sales were so high. So think about that. Leave me your thoughts down below. I appreciate them, and I would love to read them, and I will see you all next time. Don't forget to join my Patreon. You can get a free book every month, as well as access to manuscripts of all the live writes that I do live every Saturday. So that's like extra books there. So check that out, and I will see you all next time. Have a great day.